I saw this book. Well, at first I heard about the book through a podcast with Fernie Cotton, and it was really good. It was an interview, and how Clover Stroud was discussing living with, well, what I guess what struck a chord was, I think it was towards the end of the podcast, she said, death is life. Death is life. And she repeated it, and it was quite, and a couple of things that she said in the podcast made me think, actually, this is really a really interesting, it sounds like a really interesting book to discuss how we can talk more about death and dying, so it becomes a part of, and people's communication through life, and how it sort of, like she was saying, like death is seen as it happens to everybody else, and it's done privately, and it's very sensitive, and no one wants to talk about it. Whereas Clover Stroud was saying, actually, death happens to everybody, and she's in her circumstances. And when she lost her sister, she just saw death as vivid and colourful, and brought about different things in life that she hadn't recognised or was grateful for before. So yeah, I guess that's why I thought, this will be a good book to discuss. So a bit of background is that she lost her sister in 2019 to breast cancer, and her sister Nell was a very vibrant character, wasn't she? By the sounds of it, she owned and run a circus and lived a very colourful life, and she went through some cancer treatments and was told that she had, I think it was months to live, and then died quite quickly after that with liver failure, I think it was. So that's what led Clover Stroud to write the book. She is an author. She's written other books, but about her experiences, especially in the first year of living without her sister, whom she was very close to. So yeah, The Red of My Blood by Clover Stroud. Where do we begin, Claire?
Well, whether we could pick up on, you've already talked about the colour aspects of the book.
Yeah.
So yes, there's the red of my blood, but actually all the way throughout there's a reference to colour. It's not always very obvious, but when you reflect back on it, that reference to colour is there, and it's really powerful. And actually when you reflect on your own life and the colours that you see and things, you can sort of relate to that a little bit. And it's very powerful that she pulls out that colour and what she sees and uses quite a lot of examples around that.
I think she said, didn't she, that she obviously was creative because she's an author, but she never felt she was as creative as her sister. And her sister dying, the months afterwards, she became more creative. Because I remember reading, I don't know what you thought, Claire, but for the first few chapters, I was thinking, this lady describes grief in such detail, but it is colourful. It's not dark, but it was so raw, and they almost didn't match. And it wasn't until sort of probably chapter 4 onwards that you could see why, in a way.
It was almost like they came together.
Yeah.
So prior to that, you had all these lovely colours that she would describe, but she was having this absolutely horrible time. And then as the book goes on, I think they merge together, don't they, more?
Yeah.
And that's then towards the end where she talks about how after this year, it was really the year, wasn't it? That was the clear focus of the book, and she got to that year and she dreaded that year, and then that year came, and then you actually start to see through again the colour, but how things are starting to not fade, but how she's able to cope in a better way with what's happening, and her reflections on things and talking with other people and reactions to other people's reactions are much calmer.
Yeah. She explains, doesn't she, about signs in the book. So she talks about how death has made her more grateful for the things around her, and she recognises things more through grieving for her sister. But she was talking about signs, and there was one particular, and I know this sort of resonated with me when she was being interviewed by Fern Cotton about the story that she talks about in the book about the horses. So she was saying how people do see signs when somebody dies. So it could be a robin or a butterfly, and for that fleeting moment, you think, "Oh, is this is this my sister? Is she come in another form to say hello, or just to let me know I'm with her?" And then Clover was saying she got to a point where she would get quite angry with herself because she thought, well, of course it's not my sister, it's a butterfly. But actually then began to appreciate that, actually take it for what it is. So it may be a sister, it may not, but the fact that she's recognised, the butterfly that she saw, and recognised its beauty, is enough. It's brought that sort of moment to her life that she wouldn't have had before losing her sister Nell. And the story, going back to the story about the three horses, it was just a moment where she was struggling, as she did, and still does have moments of struggling with losing Nell. And these three beautiful black horses came into her country home. It sounds like she lives in a farmhouse or somewhere with land, and she for a moment thought, this is a sign from Nell. Nell's saying that she's with me, and then not long after that, there was a lady that came around the corner with a bridle and was like, "Oh, my horses escaped," and da, da, da. And she, for a little while, she'd become a bit annoyed and thought, "Why did I think that was my sister? It's clearly not my sister. It's just three horses escaped." And then thought, actually, this moment was quite beautiful, and that's through grieving that she's just able to appreciate. And
absolutely, because when the person was apologising for these horses appearing, actually she was saying, actually, I really just wanted to thank her, because for that moment of time, and it's hard to know how long that moment of time was, but it was clearly a very precious moment. If those horses hadn't escaped and appeared in her yard, then actually she wouldn't have had that moment, and she was so grateful for that moment. And that gratefulness is a theme, like you were saying, that comes through, isn't it? That appreciation of many things like that. There's a lot of references to nature as well, aren't there? And sort of getting outside and really appreciating that fresh air and going off riding on a horse and all of those kind of things to almost get closer to her sister through nature.
Because it does sound like her sister was very, like, she, at one point in the book, because she said on the interview that I was listening to, she said, I didn't want this to be another book about grieving. And she said, I almost changed the name. This is not another book. She said, but what I wanted is to encourage people to have open and honest conversations about death and dying, so that it is something, a part of life. And for it to not ever be easier, because she said losing Nell was one of the most, it shattered her life, yet it brought some of her life together, and like you say, the appreciation of nature. The book does talk about grieving, and definitely, like you say, especially in that first year, but also talked about the positives that's come about because of it. And so that's what I was thinking about, was when you said about the gratitude, Claire. She was telling a story about regrets, and how when somebody dies, you regret not spending more time with them, or you regret not telling them you loved them enough. And one of the things she's found is that, she said, as much as it's really hard to do and it feels alien at the moment, I'm trying to do it more. I try to tell people around me that I love them, or that I'm grateful that they're in my life because they bring me joy and happiness and things like that. And she was saying, when people have regrets, it's often because they've lost that human relationship of that person. So not being able to do the tangible things. Whereas she said, I've still got all that other side of losing Nell. And she said, I've got to a point now where I think Nell was never going to live past the age that she died. But I've got a life ahead of me that will incorporate that situation and the experience of losing Nell, and to make sure that going forwards that I live the rest of my life, kind of thing. And I thought that was quite good. She put it in a beautiful way. She said, grieving isn't linear by any means, and time can be a great healer, but there are times where you feel like you're going backwards and forwards. But she said how she said it's brought so much sort of joy as well as the heartache. The way she sees grief, and it's authentic because she's actually lived it. So it's not someone saying, oh, you should do this, or she just describes it beautifully. That's all I can say.
Yeah, it's a really powerful use of words, isn't it? Which is what authors do. I appreciate that. And I thought it was interesting that she wrote this book kind of nearly towards the end of that first year, from what I can gather, but actually took herself away to do that to a friend's house and there's quite a lot of humour, isn't there, when you think about, I think she went to the friend's house and she ate things, a few sort of strange foods, so she didn't have to cook, or she had this very minimal diet during that time. And there were things like that were amusing and funny sometimes, weren't there, or things that her children were getting up to, because that's what children do.
Yeah.
And actually, because the main content was very serious and sad, of course it was, any element like that was probably there was probably more emphasis upon it, because it was very different to the serious sort of sad reflective content, really.
Yeah.
So it had probably a greater impact.
She welcomed other things that made her feel alive, didn't she? I mean, she talked openly about a sexual relationship with her husband because it made her feel alive. And like you say, the kids interacting and doing things, but at the same time was very aware that she was grieving for her sister.
And she talked a lot about how people made her feel. And that was really important, wasn't it? And I think there's a lesson for everyone there, because sometimes when you don't know what to say, it's okay to say, I don't know what to say. And I think in our roles, we communicate with a lot of people that are facing bereavement, don't we, or are grieving in certain ways, or have had diagnoses that are very difficult to communicate about, discuss, and accept. And her very honest approach about, that person, that was just awful that they said this to me, or I can imagine how you feel, or all of those things, but actually nobody knows how anybody really feels, do they? It's and that's, I suppose, empathy from some people came across really powerfully, and she certainly thanks those people at the end, but for other people actually it wasn't helpful, but you have to get through that, and I'm sure that's something we can probably all relate to, really.
It was definitely the just being around, was it for her? It was just knowing that people were around who loved and cared for her. It gave her that sort of strength, and and not so much I know she mentioned in the book about a friend who said, oh, I could never live without my sister, and that really resonated with her and made her quite angry, but equally recognises that sometimes people just don't know what to say, and or would avoid you because they don't know how to deal with someone who's grieving. But there's definitely this emphasis that just by being or knowing that somebody's there for you if you need them was sort of more helpful, kind of thing. Yeah. Some of it was about as well about how it made you feel about living the rest of your life without that person. And she was saying, you know, in the book, certainly, it was almost like she's accepted now this is her life without Nell. So it's not that she's in the first year. I think, like she said, the thing with the first year is that you're still close enough to the day that they die to want to turn back and sort of have that last moment and whatnot. But now she's kind of got to a point where she knows that this is her life now, and that she's sort of, it's almost like she's had to go through a process of just I guess adapting to life without Nell, rather than saying I wish Nell was here or why isn't she here kind of thing. She's accepted that that's how it was meant to be and just learned to sort of live with the memories and things.
And talking about the memories, so initially those memories are really painful and she almost wants them to go away, doesn't she?
Yeah.
And then gradually you see through the book. So at one point she makes a certain recipe that she managed to find in a book, and she was so glad that she'd written in the front of that book when she'd given it to her sister, because otherwise it would just be a book.
Yeah.
But actually it was a book where she'd written in the front, I think it was her birthday, and they'd gone to see a certain show, and then that brought back that memory, and actually that was a happy memory that really gave her comfort. But probably if she'd had that memory much earlier on, that wouldn't have been the best experience for her. And you see how that evolves, that those memories having a much more positive influence going forward and being much more acceptable, whereas formerly she would want to almost fight them off, because they were memories, because that person wasn't here anymore and you can't make any more memories.
The other thing that she talked about, the other sort of experience, is about talking about what comes afterwards, and certainly in the interview that she had with her, and she said, we don't know, and we can only have our own belief systems. And she said, I wished I had more conversation in the book. She said, I wish I had more conversations with Nell about what she believed in, or to say, you know, if there is an afterlife, or there is an energy there, or whatever, if there's if there's still an existence, whatever that might be, then give me a sign, and what is going to be that sign. So she said she wished she had more conversations, but it sounds like she didn't get a chance because obviously Nell died quicker than they thought. But one of the things that she said in the interview, and I think it's in the book, is they went for a walk. Nell and Clover went for a walk, and it was at the time when Nell was told that her cancer was incurable and things were progressing. And Nell said to Clover, don't worry about me, I'm going to be a legend, a dead legend. And she said that has really helped me, because she said when I visualise her, she said because Nell died before lockdown happened, so she died late 2019. And Clover says she often wonders how Nell would have coped with lockdown, because she was quite a creative lady. She would have made it fun, is what she said. But she said now I just visualise her being busy and doing. And she said, and I think she would have been a legend. Yeah, she could imagine that she would have just lived her life on, as she always has done, busy, colourful and lively, and yeah.
And they'd had one sort of conversation about death, hadn't they? Where I think Nell had sort of said, well, I suppose it's an opportunity for a really good long sleep. And actually, yes, absolutely it is. So, but had not, I suppose, not been willing to further explore that, because probably she thought she had time, and she thought that there would be maybe the opportunity to discuss that again.
Yeah. And definitely when Clover was talking about Nell and life and everything with Fern, she said, and I did write a note here about it, because it was almost like nobody knows whether it's going to be their last goodbye or their last cuddle or their last big conversation, and it's just to live life being aware that you don't know, kind of thing, and just being grateful for every moment, with loved ones and things. I can't find it here, but I did make a note, because I thought, yeah, that's right. You don't know, do you?
No.
How life is going to be, and you do have to. How many more times am I going to see you? She said that often. I'm so conscious about that now, and communicating with the ones you love, so that they absolutely know that that you love them.
And I think she moved on from it being one thing that might be her sister to her just being there generally as a presence, not within an object or an animal or a piece of nature, but it is a piece of nature, I suppose, but in that whole surroundings of her, that presence could be there, sometimes more strongly if perhaps she was cooking that particular recipe, sometimes less so, but actually it was always going to be there. And the reassurance of that was quite helpful and powerful.
Yeah. One of the things I thought was quite good as well is, it was just Clover remembering all the jokes they had between them.
The code words that she said
at
the end. Yeah.
And they used to say, what was it? Pure new wool.
Yeah.
And that's what she said as well. So that it's those kind of things that are just their own things. And she said sometimes when she's with friends, some of these things come up, but it's still not the same, because it was their thing. Yeah. Pure new wool.
I suppose it's interesting as well, the way that now we have, I'm sounding like I'm very old here, now we have social media and all those other ways to communicate, so WhatsApp and text messages, all of those kind of things. She started to then look at some of those messages, didn't she?
Yeah.
And then there was some regrets as to, gosh, did I ever actually reply to that message? And gosh, I wish I had, but now I haven't. And what do I do with that message? And that's all very difficult, isn't it? And then there's other conversations that definitely did happen. And then there's also this feeling that actually those face-to-face interactions were absolutely the best ones. But there is that in the background, and she doesn't explore that an awful lot, but it's definitely there, that actually there is all this kind of social media, WhatsApp, all of those things that are there, and then they stop, and it's what do you do with them?
Like account, like she talked about Facebook accounts, wasn't there? And there was where I think Nella tagged Clover into something, or that might have been the WhatsApp or something. And it was left open-ended, and it was kind of, because in the book, it might have been the book, or it might have been the interview that she gave about the WhatsApp as well. So she had Nell's phone, Clover, didn't she?
Yes.
And the WhatsApp group that they were part of, it had said Nell has left the group. And that really sort of jolted her. It sort of brought her back. And like you say, we didn't have, so it gives you another layer of what people have to cope with when they're grieving as well.
And I'm not sure if it was in this book, or somewhere else I've seen, but possibly here, that people were wishing a person on Facebook who died, but people didn't know that, because not everybody that you are perhaps associated with on social media knows you actually that well. And then it pings up that it might be your birthday. They wish you a happy birthday, but they don't know that you've died. And there's a lot of thoughts around that, I suppose, aren't there? And
Yeah.
you know, does this Facebook profile become a shrine to somebody, or actually is it? Are you able to delete it? I don't know about the pros and cons of that, but
Yeah.
it does open up that whole new world of all of this technology that we've got.
Yeah.
And just that's almost another element to deal with, isn't it? On top of all of those other practicalities that you're dealing with as well.
Yeah. Because you've still got some kind, you know, that person who's died has still got some kind of digital existence, if you like.
Yeah.
You know, like you say, a Facebook page that's still active, and yeah, it's weird. The other thing we didn't talk about, and we probably, is the fact, you know, that about her mum as well. Her mum was really poorly for a long time, because she had an accident.
Yeah.
And that obviously adds another sort of, like, because she's had that experience of losing her mum.
And it's almost like she lost her mum twice.
Yeah.
So she had the accident, and then she was very, very disabled following the accident, wasn't she? But then lived for quite some time before she then died. And that it's that living with a different person, because perhaps that character and personality don't come over in the same way that they did before.
Yeah. So whether that had any influence on the way she grieved for now, you know, in either it helped or it just added. You know, I know she said something about when she was growing, when her mum had the accident, she was only 16, and at that time a lot of her friends hadn't experienced any trauma or losing someone or anything. And she said those feelings now are much better, because it seems like people around her, there's more relevance. Because as you get older, obviously people around you
are affected by.
Yeah. There's lots of little intricacies, isn't there, in the book?
There is, and it's definitely not a book you can sit down and read all at once.
No.
And that's obviously not the intention. And sometimes you just have to be aware of how it affects you as a reader as well. So you've got to be probably in the right place to read it at the right time of day, or in the right, so somewhere very quiet. It would be harder to read with a lot of distraction, wouldn't it? I think, because you really have to concentrate on the words so that they have their full effect. And then, you know, at some point you think, actually that's enough for now, because that's enough to process, because it's so powerful. There's so much packed in there, isn't there? That actually you have to say, right, that's enough for me now. I need to digest all of this before I move on to the next bit to really make the most of this. And it's something I think that I would want to read again. And I think it's that kind of book where when you read it again, and I think particularly after our discussion as well, we may well pull out different things as well for us to reflect upon.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those books where you would read it again and just hear different things, or read different things that you would have read the first time around, like you say, because it very much depends on where you're at in life, how you're feeling when you're reading it as well. Absolutely. I know some days, because I listened to the audio book, and there were some days I just felt I couldn't listen to it. And then there was other days that, you know, before I knew it, I'd got, you know, done a whole chapter sort of thing. But also with the audio book, if anyone does listen to it, the only thing is I felt like I wanted to make notes, which I did, because you just, there's so much to it.
Absolutely, yes.
But on the whole, would you say it was a book about grieving? I mean, that she said that wasn't her whole intention.
I think it gives you a massive insight into that person's grief. And you almost, and this is probably the wrong thing to say, because you don't do it with them, because you don't imagine how they do that, but you do feel you're on this journey with her. And when she's really bogged down in the early days, where, you know, it just, she's getting to that point of it's kind of the after the funeral time. I suppose she's just then, and you're down there with her. You find yourself down there with her, I suppose, and then you almost start to, you can just see as the book goes on those glimmers of light, hope, things just changing a little bit. And then after that first year, you just see how it kind of all turns itself around a little bit. And that's, and you can see that evolving, and then it sort of happens, and then it doesn't, it's quite tentative, and then it does, and you're starting kind of on this next road after that particular year. And I think year is probably it's like you say, that it's that counting, can I still go backwards? But then you get to the year, and actually at that point you've got to go forwards. And that she shares really well her thought processes about going forwards, and this is how I have to go forward. And there's been some going forward in that last year, of course, and things like going to see an editor who was quite empathetic and gentle and kind, but she knew that they were doing that. And that again is quite a difficult thing as well, because actually people are trying to be gentle and kind, but do you want people to treat you in a different way? That it or do that so obviously? Again, it's about how that makes you feel, isn't it? And I think throughout the whole book you've got how this one person feels, and at the end she does really reflect upon the fact that this was her story about her. And I did start to wonder throughout the book, I suppose because I'm probably quite nosy, but gosh, I wonder what impact this had on this person, because there were lots of other people, weren't there? And you get a bit of insight into her father and stepmother, her children, a little bit her husband. But other than that, it's very rightly focused upon her. And that must have been very hard to almost write that about yourself without all those other influencing factors and all those people that she loved around her, but just keeping it to that pure feeling that she had.
You're right, because Nell had children, didn't she? As well, and like you say, they had a bigger family, and she's got 5 children herself, hasn't she? But like you say, the book is very much about her and how she felt during that time. And I guess that's probably because, I was going to say, because who knows, grief is so different for different people anyway. Whereas this comes from a place of, she must have a degree of emotional intelligence, and very aware of how she feels and how other things are making her feel, like interactions with other people and situations. And she, in the first couple of chapters, she talks about the funeral, doesn't she? She can't even say the word funeral, and
And when you say about words, actually, there's some words throughout the book that are in a different text, aren't there? Or they're bigger or smaller or so tiny because it's such a word that she doesn't want to say. And that's really powerful, isn't it, in the text, the way that those words are written.
Well, I guess because I listened to it, and she would, so when she was saying she'd go funeral, and I wondered how it would present as in the book.
I see. Yes. There are kind of.
She just didn't want to say it.
I'm struggling to find one now, but yes, there is the way it comes across, and that's quite powerful in the and then it's sometimes people talking to her, or that's how I say it's in a different bolder text, the pure new wool and the watering can, and different things like that. So and that I think that's really kind of powerful in the way that comes across in the writing as well.
It's like I say, it's just so, there's lots of different bits and bobs, that you could talk about, little bits. And I guess it's one of those things that you kind of, it's hard to just, you do have to read it to sort of get those little the things that you can get from it. But I guess for me, the whole thing was how do I put it? I suppose when I was first listening to it, the audiobook, it was almost like made you think about your own perception of things. And like we've worked in like palliative care and for a long time, and but still my to have such colour be described in death and dying and grieving really made me think about how I view it, and I do have open conversations with families and things because of experiences in work and things. We quite often talk about death and dying, and definitely Clover talks about how it's part of the dialogue in their family that she said nothing's going to prepare my children for death, but if we can talk about death and dying and communicate with each other about it, having, like she said, ridiculous debates and things, she said, I'm hoping then they become more robust to the idea that death is part of life. But it's still with me, despite me thinking that I'm quite open and out there and view death and dying in a way that it is part of life. I still couldn't get my head round how she described death and grieving in such vivid colour. Because it almost like you do see grief when you do perceive it as dark and private, and yeah. So it's nice in one way to have it described in such a vivid, beautiful way.
Yes, yeah, and that you're in that darkness, but all surrounding you is all of these things. And shall I read the last paragraph?
Yeah.
Is that helpful? So now I understand that it's not possible to know, just as I will never understand the redness of my blood. Why is my blood so red? Why is it so red? I cannot know that, but I do know that as often as I need, I will tell the story, and that in looking for Nell, I found the darkness might surround me, but that it no longer scares me.